everyone. We are back with another war video today, and this is going to be very different compared to my usual videos though. We're going to be talking through the new nodes on the war map, and kind of different counters you can have for them, and then potentially defenders as well. On the defender side, I am going to give general comments. I'm not going to talk about specific defenders as I don't want to tell people who are placing on defense, obviously. But hopefully this will help you if you are planning, or even if you're just doing, you have an assigned path and you want to have some advice, tips, or potential champs you could use for that attack. To give a little background on myself, I have been in a Masters Alliance for several seasons now. I just recently got Mastership, so 20 seasons of getting Masters. I've been a war planner at 4Loki for a little over a year now, maybe a year and a half. And yeah, previously I was in Salty and then in DSVG for a season before I joined 4Loki. And I've been in 4Loki for about, I think, 2 years now. But yeah, I'm going to gloss over a lot of the paths or the nodes that are the same as previously, but I'll try and dive into the nodes that are different. To start though, we're going to just go path by path before we get to mini islands. Starting with node 1, this is the old node 37. So this was the first mini boss island fight previously on the old map. Standard regen counters work here. Anyone that provides a heal block, Omega Sentinel, Warlock, Lady Deathstrike, all those kind of counters work. So pretty standard here for this fight. And I don't want to dive too much into it because it is an existing node, and this video is probably going to be pretty long. Node 10, more of the same. This node is the same that's been for a very long time. Masochism over time. Ideally, get yourself a Wags, use an attacker that doesn't apply debuffs, and you're very safe. Obviously, there's other counters that are great there. Negasonic is another great attacker for that specific node. This node is new, but it's pretty standard. Basically, you want to be able to apply a heal block. Again, same counters as previously. Omega Sentinel, Warlock, Lady Deathstrike, plenty of others that apply heal block. Sentinel now. And then it has higher energy diet, so you do want to use someone that doesn't have a bunch of energy damage. And then obviously you don't want to apply Incinerate, Shock, or Cold Snap here, or they'll be regenning a bunch. Besides that, very similar to the previous node. And then node 28 is again not been changed. This was one of the paths that's probably changed the least. Buffet over time, Arc Overload, and then the Reinvigorated Unblockable. You want to do a heal block champ and someone that's Nullify immune ideally, or you can get away with one or the other. So Nullify immune champs that have a heal block, you have Omega Sentinel, who's great for most fights on this path. And then you have other champs, Gallons Nullify immune. You can usually burst them down if it's a correct matchup. Dazzler now, and then any buff immune champs obviously like Titania. And then the other one for Mystic is White Tiger. So yeah, that's path 1. Again, pretty standard path, very similar to what it was before, and not one of the more difficult nodes paths. And the path is consistent across the whole path, all being heal related, regeneration related, which is different now compared to a lot of the other paths. Number 2, look at my notes here. This one is not the same as before, but pretty similar. Like previously, use buff immune. Titania will destroy this fight or this path most of the time. Otherwise, if they play someone who's not a Mystic, then you really don't have to worry about it except for this new burst neutralize. So you don't want to use someone who's buff heavy regardless of what the defender is. And for this node, for placing defense, again, I didn't talk about path 1 because it's the same as before. For defensively, you could place a Mystic that helps them out. But again, if you place a Mystic, someone's just going to bring Titania or a different buff immune. Here we are back with the strike counter, and I want to give a general note about strike counter. The best way to counter strike counter is it does defend on the defender, and some of them don't really matter. Like this one, for example, Amplify. If the defender doesn't have a bunch of buffs, then you can just ignore strike counter. But the other way to do it is if you have an attacker that has passive power gain or active power gain. So someone like Hyperion is very great for this. Sorcerer Supreme has passive power gain. Serpent has power gain. Havoc. These champs kind of allow you to very easily play around strike counter. Another option is to always use a power start 1. That way you kind of are, you don't, I wouldn't throw a special right away, but you do some hits, you throw a special, and then you're kind of in a mid cycle where it's not as critical to throw the 5 lights or 4 lights, 3 mediums, and 1 heavy before you throw your special. So there's a couple ways around strike counter in general, but those are some of the ones I think make the most sense. The other part here is to watch out for encroaching root. Root has been added on several nodes across the map. Just the best way is to play around it. Obviously, if you throw a special, you get out of roots as well. So that's kind of the way to do it. For defensively on this node, you want to put someone with a lot of buffs so the Amplify, does something. A defender with power gain so that the node does something. So, Serpent, again, not saying you should play Serpent here, but, power gain, Hyperion. And again, passive power gain would also fall under this as it is an ability, or actually just ability power rate. So, yeah, I think defenders that have passive power gain are the best here. Moving along to the second section of Path 2, Node 20. Again, another strike counter, like I talked about. You want to do someone who has passive power gain or just use a power start 1. This one is Vitality, which increases the potency of regen. So if you want to place a defender here that benefits from that, you want to play someone with regen. Plenty of defenders have regen. Sasquatch, Lady Deathstrike, Sinister. There's a bunch of different options that have a bunch of regen. So any of those kind of benefit from this node. And then there's the Never Back Down as well, and use it or lose it, so you got to throw your special right away. On attack, again, heal block champs, Warlock, Omega Sentinel, Lady Deathstrike, Sentinel, or just attackers with a bunch of debuffs, Void. These kind of people are great against these nodes. And this one doesn't have any Indomitable, so if there is a bunch of regen and you use Void, you can kind of just cheese this node as well. Moving along to node 29, this one is very similar to the previously. The only difference here is that it's stun immune. So very common defenders placed here, and I'm fine saying the specific defenders on this one. Domino is extremely common here. Same options that you would use there still apply. You have Shuri. You can use Spider-Man 2099 with the Dex Mastery turned off. And then other defenders here. There's a bunch of different attacker counters for this specific node. You have the obvious ones who are shock immune with dealing with the EMP modifications. And then you have ones that benefit from shocks. Attackers I like sending here. Onslaught is fantastic here. He gets ramped very quickly. And then Havoc's also great here as it makes his plasmas go crazy and the shock damage does basically nothing to him. And obviously the other main thing here is to watch for the power gain, as you will get placebos unless you're buff immune. And then those expire and they gain power, regardless if it's a Mystic Defender or not. Other good options, if Domino's not placed here, you can have Titania here or any buff immune, and they basically turn off the node for everything here except for the stun immunity at this point. So that covers Path 2. We will jump to Path 3 now, and this path has some of the same nodes and some different. The first node is the old node 21. So this was later in section 2, the first fight of section 2 on Path 3 previously. Standard attackers here that you want to use: someone who's bleed immune, someone who applies armor break. You got Deathless King Groot. Scream and Gladiator are great here as well, as they reduce the ability accuracy of armor up. So Scream basically turns it off. Gladiator can turn it off. Again, Scream, you want max sig. But these attackers are also great here. And then again, you can always just deal with the glancing and just use a bleed immune. That can make the fight longer. But you got champions like Kushala. Any of the robots are basically bleed immune. So those are the kind of options here. Defensively, play someone with an armor up. Not much to say on that one. Next, we have our third strike counter at this point. This one is not as restrictive. It'll basically just combat power rate is what is prevented. So if you do not follow strike counter, you just won't be able to throw specials. Again, not the worst thing in the world if you bring the right champ. So this one isn't too punishing. And then the sixth sense is the part I think is a little more something you need to worry about with the auto block. There's a couple ways around this. You bring someone who's auto block immune, such as Null, using his mediums and heavy attacks. He's auto block immune. The other option, besides using someone who's auto block immune, you can just heavy attack only. So, yeah, this one's not too scary, but just something you need to think about. There are some tricky defenders. If you put someone who already has a high chance of auto block, it'll make them extremely annoying. For example, MODOK or someone like that. There's also plenty of defenders who, if they're hard to stun, would make this a good node, because obviously stunning them to get easy heavies can make this node tricky. So if you aren't able to stun them, typically, Negasonic, other defenders that you really want to only hit when they're stunned, that can make, or defenders that you can't easily stun can make this node tricky as well if you don't bring the proper counter. Moving up to the second section here, this is a different node. It's very, I won't say very unique, but it's different compared to previously. It has some parts of previous nodes. The overwhelming odds, this was the first node originally, node 3, where everyone stuck Venom, because when he hit you, he basically just instantly killed you. So the overwhelming odds is still there. So having a defender that has a lot of buffs is very beneficial for this node. When the attacker activates a special attack, they are also inflicted with a cowardice. So that means your specials are not going to do as much damage on this node as well. And then the encroaching stun is the big worry. Yeah, you need to throw a special while encroaching stun, every 20 seconds basically, to make sure you don't get stunned. The other options are having a stun immune champ, such as Hercules. When ramped, obviously, he won't get stunned. So that's another option. Defensively, like I said previously, champions with a lot of buffs are going to be very scary here. The other one I would suggest is defenders that have very long special animations. That can be tricky on any encroaching stun node, as if they're mid special 2 and it takes 5 seconds for it to fire off and the encroaching stun's coming, you're kind of just shit out of luck and you're going to have to eat it at some point. So those would be my suggestions defensively. On attack, you can assign an attacker that can shrug debuffs. That obviously gives you a good chance of shrugging the stun, such as Crossbones, champions with the cleanse, Jabari, Chi. These champs can help you get around encroaching stun, or you just play with encroaching stun. Throw your specials when it's coming around, and that's how you deal with it. Moving to node 30. This is another new node. Combat Deja Vu Disintegration, and then Cold Turkey. So, and with Safeguard, 1% Safeguard, which, yeah. So the options here are, you want to play around Combat Deja Vu. So you do not want to throw the same basic attack twice in a row. You need to play around it. That's kind of the deal on this node. With Cold Turkey, you cannot have the option of shrugging the debuffs, as you will take a burst of damage if you do that as well. So you really just need to play around the node. And then Safeguard, obviously, you want to use someone with damage over time effects or who has burst damage. So this node is pretty annoying. Again, technically anyone can do this node, but there's some tricky defenders that can make this annoying. Again, placing a defender where it's not easy to just do basic attacks in the correct order is good. And then purifying debuffs. So placing a defender that applies a bunch of debuffs to you already can also benefit here, as they won't be able to use an attacker that can cleanse them or purify them, as they will take the burst damage. Another option, which, again, I don't know if this is 100% correct, but Deathless King Groot doesn't cleanse or purify debuffs when he gets rid of the debuffs, I guess I'll say. So he can kind of get around this node, and he's a good option. He doesn't have the best damage for Safeguard unless you throw the special 2 and the Incinerates get rolling, but he's a good option here as well. Defensively, yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of champs who can work here defensively. I won't get into specifics on this node, but there's plenty of defenders that you can kind of benefit from this node. Again, applying a lot of debuffs that can't be cleansed is always great. For example, Void. Moving along to path 4, and this path has a bunch of different fights as well. There is the reverse controls, which I hate. I will not be going down this path. Options for reverse controls are obviously reverse immune champions, robots. So those kind of you just immediately ignore this part of the node. So placing a defender that robots aren't great against, or other champions that are immune to reverse controls, is good to place here. And the other thing is calcify. So whenever the defender activates special attack, they inflict 3 petrify. This means you can, it'll reverse your healing, and it will reduce your power gain as well. So the calcify, obviously it stops Juggernaut from being good here, but it can also prevent other people that have a bunch of regen. So you don't really want to put anyone here who does that. And like I said previously, placing a defender who robots or other of the typical reverse control immune champs are not good against forces people to play reverse controls, which I hate. These next 2 nodes are similar, where they both have the severe debuffs. Now, for the severe debuffs, I already mentioned Deathless Kangaroo is a good option, as he shrugs the debuffs while not qualifying as a cleanse or anything. The other option here, which this is not my favorite champ, so I'm not going to say I recommend it, but he does get around the node very well, is Patriot. Patriot obviously benefits from having debuffs on him. He also gets a lot of hits during his combo, so that gets him around this unsteady very easily. But you do have to get intercepts in, so if you don't do that, your power gain is going to be extremely reduced from suppression. It reduces your combat power rate, so then you'll kind of be stuck in a no man's land with no specials. So it would be a very slow fight. Defensively, assigning a defender here who's hard to get a bunch of hits against really helps as well. Oh man, this video is going to be long. I'll try and be faster with these. Again, same thing here. You can use Patriot, like I said, Deathless Kangaroo can shrug the debuffs, but these severe debuffs, when it says trauma, it makes you think they're just going to apply a trauma debuff. It doesn't. If you read the node, it says taunt and physical vulnerability. So assigning a defender who's immune to taunt can help as well. And this one is steady build up fury, so they're not going to go unblockable, but they will have a big fury that's going to hurt. So again, playing around the node is the best way to go about it. Or playing the node is probably just the best way to go about it here, or use Patriot. Although I would not assign Patriot. This one, same node as previously. Dust is commonly praised here. I'm not going to dive into this one. You obviously don't want to get too many debuffs on you. Using a champion that is immune to heal block helps make sure this doesn't happen, or just making sure immune to whatever the other debuff that defender placed here places. So in Kushala's case, using Ironheart is great. Other option is to use a attacker that can block unblockable attacks, such as Kushala. Path 5, I'm going to skip all of Path 5 basically, except for I'll touch real quick on this one because it is very similar. Obstinate Charge, basically reparry. That's all you need to do there. Make sure you can reparry. If you can't, practice. And the damage over time, so don't rely on damage over time effects. You don't really want to do that for these nodes anyway, as they have the purification when the protection comes back, so it's not great to do that anyway. But obviously something to keep in mind here is you really don't want to apply damage over effects on this node anymore. Node 14 is the same as before. This one has a slight change as well. It has the falter, something to just watch out for. Besides that, it's the same node. You gotta get intercepts. Using a miss counter is great here. If not, play around and be aware of it. I don't think it's too scary of a node. And then 32 is the exact same, I believe. Yes, same node, so I'm not going to dive into that one. Working our way to path 6, we are going to look at this one. It again has a falter. So falter is another thing they seem to be throwing around here. And then power efficiency whenever the the attacker misses. So there's ways of playing around this. Every tense in the combo meter inflicts them with a falter passive. So you can play around the falter passive, obviously, or you can use a miss counter. Those are the 2 options here. So yeah, defensively, placing a defender that already has a falter part of their kit or a miss as part of their kit will make this fight more challenging because they'll have power efficiency a lot if you don't have a proper counter. Node 15, and this is one of the trickier nodes and more unique nodes on the map by far. It applies a phantom bleed to the defender. Now, there are plenty of defenders that gain benefit when they have a bleed on them. I don't want to touch on a bunch of them, but for example, an obvious one would be Domino, where she gets the power gain and increased special damage. But there are a lot of defenders that benefit from a bleed on them. Now, even just ignoring that, the next two nodes, part of this node, are also very unique. Whenever the defender is afflicted with a debuff, the attacker is inflicted with an exhaustion debuff, reducing critical damage rating by 5%. Now, reducing critical rating slows the fight down, but having a bunch of exhaustions on you isn't great. So typically you'd want someone who can shrug it, Mole Man, Crossbones, etc. But with the second part of this node, while the attacker purifies or cleanses a debuff, the defender gains a protection passive, means that this will become a very slow fight if you do that. So this node, it can be very tricky. You don't really want to shrug the debuffs, as then you have the protection, which just slows this fight down to a crawl. Dealing with a bunch of exhaustion on you will be annoying. Now, there is a champion, and I'll talk specific on this one, who is immune to exhaustion, and that is Emma Frost. She is immune to exhaustion while in diamond form. It's something I've tested by assigning some people during the off season. She is a good option here. Obviously, you have to make sure you're in diamond form the entire time, and her being immune does not count as a purifier cleanse. But there's other defenders here who are great to place as well, but I don't want to dive into that because some of them I'm planning to place. We're moving along to node 24. This one, pretty simple node. You have fisticuffs at the beginning, so that means you can't apply debuffs or have buffs for the first 30 seconds of the fight. Usually this means the fight's just slower, which will likely be the case. The Daunted is annoying as you're going to take a lot of block damage, as the Daunted makes the special attacks, the damage is increased during it, so you're going to take more chip damage, as everyone hated that tactic where that was the case. And then the other part here is the increased combo. If you place a defender here who benefits from the attacker having a high combo, that's the other option. Otherwise, this one, there's not a ton going on here. I don't think it's one of the scarier nodes on the map, but maybe I'm wrong. Combat Deja Vu, this is an old node. This was node 48 previously, so I don't want to talk about this one too much. Again, Conflictor, place a Wags, makes it easier, or use a champ who doesn't place debuffs. Prowess Puncture and Deja Vu Prowess, you don't use the same attacks in a row. Other options, people who reduce ability accuracy. Crossbones is fantastic here. Once you have enough Furies, you don't have to worry about the Prowess or Prowess Puncture, and then he doesn't need to apply debuffs, and even if he does with a bunch of Furies, it doesn't trigger Conflictor, so he's great here for a lot of matchups. All right, now, well, yeah, we're taking a long time. We're speeding up, though. Path 7, there's a lot of the same here as well. This node is the same. Typical assignments, Negasonic, Onslaught, Omega Red. Typical defenders, you want people that purify or cleanse stuff. That means you're going to go Skill, Korg, Chi, etc. are super common placements here. This one, another Tranquilize. When the defender activates a special attack, in this case instead of the attacker, you want to assign someone who's a Mystic or someone who has high physical resistance already, and they're going to get Furies, the defender. So, attacking wise, Titania, a buff immune that doesn't benefit from Tranquilize, or someone who doesn't need a lot of special attacks is great here, or someone who can get around physical resistance, has more energy attacks. Also, this is a passive Fury, so you can't really get around it with a Mystic defender using Stagger, Nullify, etc. This node, when then just struck by a contact attack, defender has an 80% yield, 15% attack back. And then whenever the defender is afflicted with non-damaging debuff, they gain an unblockable passive. So you don't want to parry here unless you have a white Magneto, and you want to use someone with non-contact attacks. There's plenty like that. You can use Negasonic. You can use Shuri. You can use Omega Red with his mediums and heavies. So those are the kind of attackers you want to use here, and you basically just don't want to stun the defender at all. So placing a defender who you don't want to do that to works. Also, placing a defender who applies non-damaging debuffs to themselves is great to place here, as they will be unblockable. So there's a couple options there. Again, I want to say any specific defenders, but placing a defender who already applies debuffs to themselves, Attuma, or someone else like that, will make this node tricky as well. I think Attuma does it typically. I don't think you have to do it. And this node is the same thing as previously. Again, mostly people are assigning the typical skill champs that shrug debuffs. You know, Deathless King Groot or someone with a cleanse as well works. But Korg, Chi, Zemo, I see here a lot. These people kind of make this node trickier. And again, same attackers as the first node on this path. Omega Red, Negasonic, Onslaught are the typical assignments. Moving to Path 8. This one is very is different as well. Path 8 has changed quite a bit in general here. Options: using a buff control champ will help with this obviously a lot, as this is a active fury. It is a proper buff, not a passive. So having someone that can stagger, nullify, prevent with a neutralize the furies helps greatly here, and then you don't have to worry about the glancing coming up after the 5 furies. Or you can just do someone who doesn't apply big burst damage or physical damage, and someone that does a bunch of damage over time works here as well. The rise to power, just something to watch out for, as they can get increased power when they hit you, so you want to make sure you're pairing and not just taking a bunch of blocks in a hit. Defensively, placing someone here who's nullify immune, stagger immune, neutralize immune can make this node a bit trickier. Next node, this one is not the most interesting. Stun immune, you have to play around. Ability accuracy is increased by 100%, so you don't want to rely on people that are reducing ability accuracy. And then the energize means they're going to get a lot of power. You can nullify this with a Mystic Champion, which will help. The other part is the minor, but a minor setback. Defender's armor break and nullify immune. That means trying to nullify puts it on cooldown, and then you can actually nullify. It's 15 seconds, so it's pretty long. And then armor break, obviously placing a defender that you want to armor break here can make this tricky as well. Killmonger, etc. You can obviously just use someone who gets around those defenders without needing to armor break them, but it can make it force you into a very specific assignment, which can be annoying, obviously. Section 2 here, this is another new one. This is Intensify, so this is one that increases the potency, which I was thinking Amplify was. Basically, defensively, you want to play someone here who has buffs, and that will make their buffs more potent. The other part is they gain a power gain buff. So the Intensify will make the power gain more potent. So placing someone here who are using an attacker here who nullifies buffs will help and make this fight significantly easier. The Force of Will, again, Force of Will was changed a very long time ago at this point to make sure that neutralize does not work here. So do not send a neutralized champ here, as that will not prevent the buffs. So defensively also, obviously you want to place a bunch of buff champs again, and ideally nullify immune or stagger immune or fate seal immune, as that will make this node trickier. Again, for this node, don't have to worry about neutralize, someone being neutralized immune. Node 35, this is the old node 42, where it's got make a stand, one-eyed open, and power efficiency. So common defensive placements here, Gore, Serpent, are probably the two most popular ones. North Star is also very common here, as he can just throw a bunch of specials with the power efficiency. Counters here, Sim Supreme's fantastic, Long Shot's good, bunch of attackers work here, great. Just make sure you're not stunning them. Kushala is really good here as well against champions like Gore or Serpent as well. But yeah, this node's kind of the same, and it's been the same for a long time. Now, Path 9, I'm going to make a couple general notes about this one. They have very much changed this up, so there's a bunch of different debuffs here that are applied. They got the Rupture Bleed, Shock Poison, Poison Cold Snap, Incinerate Bleed. So it's not as it used to be, where it was just the first two nodes. For example, for section 1 was Incinerate Poison, second node was Bleed Shock. They're not the same, so you need to bring someone who kind of counters a lot of them, or you're just going to have to do a bunch of lane swaps or split paths, which is also not ideal. Now, obviously, champions that can counter all debuffs are better. So Crossbones, fantastic. Chi, great. Jabari, great. Mantis for Science Champions, fantastic here. Then you have some of the old ones that you used a lot. Kingpin, who's doing a lot of punching up now, so I would not recommend assigning a bunch of Kingpins until we get our 7-star. Falcon obviously counters the node. Angela as well. I'm not the biggest Angela fan, but she is great here as well. And then you have the champions that don't hit the defender that are great here. Spider-Man 2099 and Valk. Again, Valk punching up is a bit challenging at this point. So yeah. Now, going into specifics for each node, I am going to talk about which counters are good here. I know there's a table that you can look at, but the table's not the easiest to read. Rupture Bleed, this is probably the most annoying node of this path with the power efficiency. You don't have any attackers that are both bleed and rupture immune. So there's 0 that are immune to both, so you got to play around it. Bring a bleed immune champ, bring a rupture immune champ, and you have to play around the node. It's annoying, and with the power efficiency, it's super annoying. I tried Asman here because he has physical resistance. I don't recommend it until we get a 7-star Asman. Next, Shock and Poison. This one has probably the most options besides the Incinerate Bleed one. You have Maestro, Hulkling, Dust, Sandman, Cassie, Ant-Man, Nebula, Absman with the I-Bomb synergy, Spiral, the pseudo-immune, Scorpion works here, and then Ultron and Emma also work here. Again, Emma, you want to be in diamond form, but there's a bunch of options for this one. The other thing to note on this node is don't use power backs because Feat of Indestructible, which has been the case forever. All these nodes have the same previous things besides the hazard shift debuffs changing. So this one, Power Focus 2, it does have, this one has a prowess here, so it does make the specials hurt even more. That was an addition here. But Poison and Cold Snap, you have Deathless Thanos. You have Warlock, Sentinel, Iceman, Ultron, and then you have Emma again. So yeah, here, a bunch of attackers work. Iceman's fantastic here. We assigned an Iceman versus a long shot. It went completely fine. And then you have Hazard Shift, Incinerate, and Bleed with one eye open. Obviously, don't hit the defender while they're stunned. There's a bunch of champions that counter Incinerate and Bleed. Prowler, Kushala, again, Iceman, Colossus, CGR. Photon works here, not being immune to Incinerate, but she can take a bunch of, has high energy resistance, who works. Onslaught's ramped here. Nefaria works, Guardian works, Superior Iron Man works, Ultron works, and Emma works. So lots of options here. Again, don't hit them while they're stunned because that's bad. Man, we are at 32 minutes. We got to the mini boss island, so we're closing on the final stretch. Only about 15 fights left. Node 37. Now this one is pretty interesting. It's similar to what it was before, but it's not the exact same. The root are rooted. You got to play around the root. Again, throwing specials gets you out of it. You can also root the defender with this one, though. So if you stay far away, they will be rooted. This you can definitely use to your benefit. One of them is you can very easily stay far away, and all the regions will drop off, which is very nice. Obviously, when rooted, the defender just throws a bunch of heavy attacks. The regeneration, staying close, they get a bunch of regens, and then the part that makes this node very annoying is the Purified Slate. Whenever the defender activates a special attack, they purify 5 debuffs. So if you apply a heal block, they're going to purify it when they throw a special attack. Now, having an attacker that can quickly apply a heal block or passively apply a heal block is great here. The passive one, Warlock. He can work here very well. You just need to parry a good amount, hit him a bunch, and then you can keep your infection rolling. The regen will reduce, because it's a regen buff, it will reduce the rate at which you get, reduce the duration of that infection, though. Another option, because it is a regen buff, use someone who can stagger or nullify the regens. That also works. With the Purified Slate, you can also try and use an attacker who just has a ton of debuffs and just kind of overwhelm the node. There aren't a bunch that just apply an absurd amount of debuffs, but that's another option. Otherwise, Omega Sentinel and Lady Deathstrike have a very quick way to apply a heal block. Omega Sentinel and actually Lady Deathstrike, double medium, heal blocks up. So those can kind of work if you're quick about punishing their specials and getting the heal block up really quickly before the regen goes out of control. Node 38, defensively here, place regen champs. place nullify immune champs helps also well. So those are kind of the defensives. Node 38 is the same. I'm not going to touch on that one. Jumping to Node 39. This one's pretty interesting as well. They've applied a bunch of the footloose stuff and kind of the ones that have evade, which they used to have a good amount of. They got rid of them. Here, they're going to be able to evade and have an unstoppable buff. So you can have someone here who can apply slow. That obviously gets around both of those. And then the Save Perseverance means they can't be stunned, which is annoying. And then the rich get richer. So they will get a bunch of buffs if they do have the evade and unstoppable still. So there's champs that work here are ones that prevent the buffs from ever happening. You know, applying a neutralize, a bunch of staggers, etc. They can prevent the footloose from ever occurring. And then the stun immunity also can be prevented when they throw their specials, and obviously that prevents rich get richer. Having an attacker who has a bunch of buffs will let you throw a bunch of specials, which can be very beneficial here. And then having someone who applies a slow and can nullify is great. There's one champion who can do that, as far as I'm aware. Sorcerer Supreme, easy access to slow, easy access to nullify. She is really good here against a lot of attackers as well. She's not my favorite. She's very slow, but on paper, she counters basically the entire node. Aside the rich get richer, but again, if you're removing all the buffs, you don't have to really worry about that as much. Moving our way to node 40, and this is another node where Sorcerer Supreme is really good. And like I said previously, she's pretty good for strike counter as well because of the passive power gain, but she, again, applies a slow, which gets around Mixmaster, of course. The other part is the ticking Soul Bomb. You do not want to parry very often here. Now, taking hits into block is okay, but parrying will get these charges up. Once they have the charges, they apply Soul Barb. Now, Soul Barb only does damage if the defender has a bunch of buffs. So if you're able to use someone who prevents these buffs, that obviously means you can freely parry. So Stagger, Neutralize Immune, Fate Seal, those kind of things can help get around that. Now, those things don't get around Mixmaster, though. So, you know, again, Sorcerer Supreme can do both. Other options are you just use someone who's a counter to Mixmaster and evading, and then you just block attacks and don't parry, which is a very valid option. Defensively, you want to have someone here who at least has a couple buffs so that the Soul Barb is something they have to play around. And then again, if they are Nullify or Stagger immune, it makes this fight tricky. Serpent could be very annoying here, I imagine. But there's plenty of other defenders who could be tricky on this specific node. Node 41, same as before. You have to play around Bubble Shield, and they have Power Focus 2 with the root. You can shrug the root as it is a debuff. Oh no, it's passively rooted now. They changed it. Never mind. It is a passive root. So you can't have someone that can shrug a debuff. Throwing a special gets you out of the root. Power Focus 2 can be good or bad depending who the defender is. And then Bubble Shield's obviously very scary. The great options here. Ironheart is great here. I don't care if people don't like Ironheart. Once her tracking's up, she doesn't have to worry about Bubble Shield. So she's really good for this node. And then you can kind of just spam special ones, let your debuffs roll, and the fight will end. Luke, or someone who has a way to reduce the ability accuracy, works here. So Luke, when his concussions are up, stops Bubble Shield. You know, Archangel, when he has a bunch of Neros, stops Bubble Shield. So those kind of attackers also are great here. Node 42. This one is somewhat similar to the previous Node 39. It has the Power Snack and then the Power Sting. These two were both part of the old Node 39. The steady buildup unblockable, the increased defensibility actually. So when the defender or the attacker has more than 3 debuffs, the defender will be unblockable for the fight. So yeah, for this one, there's a couple ways. You want to use someone who can shrug a bunch of debuffs and who's Nullify immune. Crossbones with the Red Skull synergy is one of the best options here. He shrugs the Power Stings, he'll shrug the other debuffs, and with Red Skull, he's Nullify immune. So he's fantastic here. There's plenty of other options, you know, that shrug debuffs. Then you can kind of just play around the Power Snack, Jabari, Chi, etc. And then defensively, you want to play someone here who applies the debuffs, because that'll make this fight scary. So playing around unblockable is very annoying. So those are kind of the defenders you want to place. Drink a little water. Next node, we have node 43. Incinerate and Shock. This is the same as it was before. They now has an emphatic lock, which is a bit different. I don't see this being super important, but maybe there's an interaction or a matchup specifically that can make this tricky. But all power lock, heal block, and fate seals are automatically shared with the attacker. Now, one thing here with the heal block is interesting is if you are applying a heal block to a defender and you're using someone who's just pseudo immune to the Incinerate and Shocks, you will take damage. So using Nefaria and then having a heal block, you won't regen any of the debuffs back. Same with any of those attackers. You're not going to regen while taking the debuff, so it will hurt quite a bit more if you have a heal block applied. So that's something to be aware of. Otherwise, this does the same. Onslaught's fantastic here. He ramps from both debuffs. He's really good. Other debuff champs immune to both. Idoom's immune to both. Nefaria's basically immune to both, as I mentioned previously. Maestro is great. Ultron is good here. Havoc, Superior Iron Man, Spiral, and then Emma again. Node 44, there's only 2 champions who are immune to this node. There are Scorpion, while applying shocks. He will be immune to poison and rupture. And then you have Deathless She-Hulk when you have the Deathless Thanos synergy. She becomes rupture immune and she is already poison immune. Those are the only 2 that counter both. Another option kind of works is Red Hulk. Once he has a bunch of heat charges, he does get a bunch of physical resistance. Now, again, it's not going to prevent the ruptures. They're still going to hurt, but it kind of lets you hit a bit more into the defender when they're in the rupture phase. So that's another thing to watch out for there. And then node 43, or 45, I'm sorry, Cold Snap and Bleed with Conflictor. Basically the same node as previously, except for it's Cold Snap now instead of Shock, I think it was previously. And they're immune to Armor Break. So placing, again, a defender that's immune to Armor Break is good here. Killmonger. There's still ways around it. Obviously, if there's a Killmonger here, you use Omega Red. You can use Negasonic and play around the Cold Snap. Other champions who are immune to both Cold Snap and Bleed, you have Iceman, you have Colossus, Warlock, Sentinel, are the proper immunes, and Isofiend, actually. Is that right? I might be lying about the Isofiend thing. I'm pretty sure I'm lying about Isofiend. And then the other typical counters, you have Guardian who works, Emma works, Photon works, Ultron works, Corvus, Jabari, X-Bones, Kingpin, Chi. Again, those champions who work for all the nodes also work here. But yeah, Photon gets around this really well. I took a Kindred with my Photon, went fine, 0 issue. We are made it to the final island. Node 46 is the same as previously, except for it has the steady as she goes. Now, that makes this fight pretty annoying, as you can very easily get cornered. Now, the ways around this is having an attacker who throws a bunch of specials. That will help you stay out of your corner, as the specials remove the root mechanic for the defender, and you can push them back. So having an attacker who throws a bunch of specials will help you stay out of the corner. Defensively, you want to throw someone here who can benefit a lot from having someone in the corner, or who has a bunch of power gain. So if you have an attacker who throws a bunch of specials and the attacker, you get cornered, you can't really even outrange the specials. They're just going to hit you. So, Serpent is going to be really good here. He's good here before. He's going to be good here again. He'll very easily get you cornered with his extra power gain from this node as well. So he would be really good here. Other champs who get power gain or who just throw a bunch of specials can be very tricky on this node. I think a lot of people think this node is the same and it's going to be just as easy. I really think the steady as she goes is going to be very tricky. We'll go to 48 first, and then we'll go back to the other side. It has Safeguard. And then it has Stunning Reflection, Bleed, and Shock with Bane and Force of Will. Force of Will, we'll talk about that right away. No Neutralize, and you can't use someone who can just shut off the node like Crossbones, who, I have 5 Furies. I can now play around the Safeguard. That will not work here because of Force of Will. Safeguard, burst damage, and damage over time works here. So this node was basically made for Okoye. She applies Bleed and Shock. and she does a ton of damage over time. So she will work fantastic here. Other champs who apply a bunch of debuffs work great here to get around it. Bane, you have to play around Bane. There's not really a way around that. Just deal with it. So you have to play around it. Once Bane gets to you, make sure you hit the defender right away. Defenders who are good here, defenders with a bunch of immunities. So you place a defender who has 4 immunities and is immune to bleed and shock. This fight's going to be super annoying. They're going to have to use someone who can at least apply some kind of debuff to make this fight not take forever. So that is this node here. Node 47. This is another node that I think is one of the trickier ones on the map now. It has missing in action what it had before. It had return policy, what it had before. But now it has false confidence and fight or flight. So the way to play around this is, I think the best way is to not have a person that can deal with the fight or flight. I think it's more critical to have someone that can deal with the missing in action. Now, maybe people disagree, but with fight or flight, you can kind of just make sure you're far away from the defender and you get the unstoppable when that happens. Now, again, if they have a Mystic Defender here, that Unstoppable will eventually trigger Mystic Dispersion, or if they have a Neutralize on you, it will trigger Mystic Dispersion. So that is something you have to worry about. But I think it's easier to play around missing in action, or it's easier to deal with the fight or flight over missing in action. So champions I've used here on attack, I've tested Photon here. She is fantastic. Obviously, she can get around missing in action completely when in pure light form, and then her mediums also do not miss, so you can still play around it that way. The false confidence is a bit weird. When you get an intercept, the buffs will start to expire all at once. So if they had 5 Furies and then you get an intercept, the Furies will all start to expire, and then all at once they'll disappear. It's a bit weird, but I think it's fine. Obviously, having an attacker who prevents these buffs from happening, both Unstoppable and the Furies, is very beneficial. So defensively, there's a bunch of different ways you could play this. I think having a Nullify Stagger Immune is probably the best way, because then they can't prevent the Unstoppable or the Furies from stacking. And then the missing in action, obviously applying a defender who you can't easily heavy, makes this fight also challenging. And then node 49 is the same as previously. Bullseye's placed here a bunch. Use someone who does damage over time. Ideally Poison and Incinerate if you want to be able to parry them. And then you have to worry about Brute Force, so you want to hit them fairly frequently. And the final node is the boss node. It's similar to before. It now has an Energize and has passive adaptive. I'll say one note on this. That can be annoying now, as previously. Mystic attackers could basically just keep nullifying all the debuffs. Sim Supreme was fantastic for this because they just fed a bunch of debuffs. So that is now something you have to worry about. But besides that, it's the boss node. It's pretty standard setup. The Energize is annoying if they have an Energize themselves already, or if it just helps them throw a bunch of specials. But that is the war map. Yes, I'm sorry that was a very long video. The one other note I want to make, and I think this is very critical, is that these path fights now have a much higher health pool. So if you look at path 1 here, for example, this Adam Warlock, the defender now has 360k health. I've seen these early fights with someone with 500k health nearly. They used to have closer to 200, 250. So just saying it's a path fight, nuke it, I don't recommend that. I think you need to start bringing a proper counter to these nodes. So that is something people should be aware of, because it is a bigger health pool. And that's kind of the final note I want to leave this with. Hopefully this video will help you guys. I will add a bunch of bookmarks so people can jump to specific nodes or paths and easily look through this. But that's going to do it for this video. Obviously, again, I'm not going to say I know every single counter that should be used here. The map is very new. But hopefully this helps people. And if you have any questions, obviously feel free to put it in the comments, and I will try my best to respond to all of them. Thank you for watching.